So for our next panel, we have Federica Toldo. She earned her joint PhD in cultural anthropology at the University of Lisbon and the University of Paris-Nanterre. Her thesis focuses on the relational fabrics that emerge from three dances practiced on the island of Luanda: the carnival dance, the circle dance called rebita, and the Gigualmento dance, which she will pronounce beautifully later on, practiced during the ritual offerings to the mermaid. In 2018, Toldo started a new ethnographic research on the Gigualmento ritual and therapeutic practice, and she has published her initial findings in 2 papers in 2019 and 2021. Next, we have Curtis Andrews, who is a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Alberta. He has spent the last 20-plus years engaging with the Ewe communities in southeastern Ghana, exploring the nexus between drum, dance, song, and spirituality. His activities are collaborative in nature, and he has worked with community leaders to implement development projects that focus upon education, health, and cultural transmission. And last but not least, Eric Galm is professor of music, co-director of the Center for Caribbean Studies, and music department chair at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. He founded the Trinity Samba Ensemble and the Samba Fest, a music festival featuring the United States' debut performances of several Brazilian artists. He has conducted research, presented and performed in Brazil, Cuba, Trinidad, the United States, and Canada. His book, The Berimbau, Soul of Brazilian Music, is the first academic study of the Brazilian musical bow. So without further ado, I will bring up Federica. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this nice introduction. So, good afternoon. In this presentation, I will focus on the diacritic role of music and dance within a system of possessional practices that I observed in Luanda, the capital of Angola, where I conducted a 13-month-long ethnographic research project between 2013 and 2014, during my PhD in anthropology, followed later by my postdoctoral research in 2018. When I say system of practices, I mean to underline a certain heterogeneity that may be, and this is my argument, precisely grasped and organized through studying the role of music and dance within it. My fieldwork was conducted on Luanda Island, Ilha de Luanda, in Portuguese, a neighborhood of the city that is a sandspit adjacent to the old port of the city. Luanda was founded by the Portuguese at the end of the 16th century, and for more than 3 centuries specialized as a slave port where enslaved people forced from the interior regions were embarked to the Americas. Since the beginning of the colonization, a Catholic Creole society of slave traders and their domestic slaves raised up from the miscegenation of Portuguese men and local women. When the Portuguese founded Luanda, the island was already inhabited by a Kimbundu-speaking population under the political control of the King of Congo. This population of fishermen was known since the first chronicle of the 17th century under the name of Ashiluanda. Within the colony, the black Ashiluanda occupied the lowest position in a hierarchy of free men. They had been set free because of their role in supplying the colony with food and water, and they protected their relative privilege, practicing endogamy. Currently, people of the island call themselves Anazanga, sons of the island, Islanders in Portuguese, and they conserved quite a separated identity from the larger population of the city. The possessional practices known under the name of Scigilamento must be situated in a context characterized by the cultural contact. Catholicism penetrated very early into this region. The conversion of the King of Congo dates back to the start of the 16th century, and the first church was built on the island of Luanda at the end of the same century. The word Xinguilamento is a Portuguese adaptation of the Kimbundu verb kuxinguila, that means being possessed by a spirit. The term Xinguila, indicating the ritual specialist, is mentioned by the 17th century Capuchin missionary Cavazzi de Montecuccolo, who observed these practices in the Matamba kingdom. Xinguilamento is today a polysemic word indicating both the spontaneous manifestation of a spirit, often in a funerary context, and the ritualized other's possession that may happen in funerary contexts and in other performative occasions that I will mention later. The agents responsible for Xinguilamento are Ilundu spirits. Ilundu, plural of Quilundu in Kimbundu or Kalundu in Portuguese, first manifest themselves through pathologic behaviors similar to those of madness, such as parading naked or running around into the wood. The main characteristic of this illness is its hereditary nature. In local people world, Kalundu is an illness within the family that passes from one generation to the next. A consequence is that Ilundu affect not just one person, but a whole body of people composed of the descendant of a common ancestor. For that reason, the treatment is based on a reunion of kin, including the symptomatic person and more collateral descendant of the same generation. The ritual reunion is supervised by a ritual specialist, curandeiro in Portuguese, as the Kimbundu word kimbanda has a pejorative connotation, who aims to induce possession in the novices. Some will be reactive, while others will not. What previously manifested itself as a pathologic representation of ancestry reveals its true nature, typically in the form of one or more spirits of former humans. These photos date back from the half of the 20th century and are taken from the book of the Angolan folklorist Oscar Ribas. The last ritual step of this ritual is a cut or a puncture in the tongue of the medium that allows the spirit to answer the ritual specialist and the family questions about his or their origins. Ilundu come from the interior provinces of Angola, and their origin is revealed by the regional language. Some will speak Kimbundu, others Kikongo, Umbundu, Fiote. Once identified, the Ilundu have divinatory, witch hunting, and therapeutic functions that their medium can employ for their families or clients outside the family. In Luanda, the same divinatory and therapeutic function is also accomplished by other possessional agents that manifest themselves through people's body. Those were called, under the effect of the Catholic influence, santos or saints. Both Ilundu and saints are soul from those who have passed on. But Ilundu are African, wear red clothing, eat African food, and speak local African languages. The saints are European, dress in white, eat European food, and express themselves in Portuguese or other European language. Differently from Ilundu, that initially manifest themselves through mental illness or other physical problems, saints manifest themselves under the form of repetition of life problems, such as overworking to earn little money, constant changing of partner but never marrying, plus addictions. In short, while Ilundu are related to the domain of the body, saints belong to the domain of chance, and they specialize in solving life problems. While Ilundu are inherited, saints make friendship, sympathism, with people they like, gostam. The first implication of this opposite relational quality of the two kinds of entities is that Ilundu therapy concerns kin as a whole. Sane therapy only concerns the patient. A second implication is that only some families of Luanda, mainly concentrated among the Ashi-Luanda population of the island and the other maritime neighbors, have Ilundu, while everyone, even the ethnographer, can have saints. In both cases, the ritual treatment consists of a tentative attempt to make the entity responsible for the disease to reveal itself. But Ilundu and saint manifest their presence in different ways and different contexts. Ilundu are represented as severe and furious, bravos. Their presence is manifested through a highly exaggerated physical action. Saints are calm and charitable, manifesting themselves in the form of an irradiation. Their mission is to give advice, and their presence is associated with an extraordinary but very solemn and calm speech in a very good metropolitan Portuguese. I would like to focus on the implications of these opposite phenomenal qualities. The term xinguilamento properly refers to Ilundu possession. In the word of an interlocutor, santo não faz senzala, não xinguila, ele senta, fala, calundu é mais forte, bravo, which translated is, saints don't do senzala, they don't xingulate, they sit and speak. Kalundu is stronger and furious. Characterized by their good manners, opposite to the confusion that my interlocutor calls senzala, a term on which we can eventually talk later, saints rather talk in private situations. Differently from Ilundu, saints don't specialize in family witchcraft affairs, and they are not associated to the funerary domain. Thus, xinguilamento appears as a polysemic word and designates both the uncontrolled and unexpected possession. In the current language, the term may even be used to designate an alterated and somatized emotional state, or the ritualized musical possession. Indeed, as Gilbert Rouget argues, if the music may facilitate possession, its main function is educating and socializing it. Xinguilamento, as a ritualized possession, typically happens in funerary context. The imbrication of xinguilamento to the funerary domain was already noted by the Italian missionary Cavazzi di Montecuccolo, who lived from 1621 and 78. At funerals, xinguilamento can be both a spontaneous happening that may be provoked by the emotional alteration, or it may be a collective ritual realized at one medium, ndumbe, death, in which other living medium come dressed in red loincloth and xingulate at the sound of the percussion. Seeing the ritual, listening to the music, and seeing the dance of the spirits in the medium bodies may induce possession in somebody in the audience, and the unexpected trance of a descendant of the deceased will be interpreted as a manifestation of the spirit of the deceased. Thus, there is a feedback between spontaneous and stipulated xinguilamento, and funerals are a privileged context of reproduction of mediumship. Finally, ritualized xinguilamento also happens in another and much more public context, at collective offering for mermaids. As the ethnological literature already noted in other African contexts, the cult of Geni Loci often depend on the ancestral spirits. On Luanda Island, offering to mermaids depend on Ilundu, since the mermaids, according to interlocutor words, only accept food from Ilundu ancestral spirits in red loincloth. The traditional offering, called kakulu, was performed at the festivity of the Catholic patroness, Our Lady of the Cape, on November 23rd. However, in the last decades, several factors caused a progressive abandonment of the festival due to the growing intolerance toward traditional practices, the anti-syncretic position assumed by the Catholic Church, and an increasing interference of political post-colonial powers. Nowadays, rituals that are similar to kakulu but that are not kakulu, are commanded by public powers and provided by people of the carnival groups of the island and of other littoral neighborhoods, who are supposed to have inherited the Ilundu spirits in their families. Often, in this context, possession does not happen, but this does not invalidate the ritual efficacy. The possession in these cases is just enacted or simulated, but by people who may potentially be possessed by Ilundu spirits because they may have inherited them. In other words, these people have Ilundu spirits, even if they don't actually manifest them. For that genealogical reason, they can legitimately dress in red loincloth. They are allowed to represent the Ilundu in the double sense of the term, through acting for them and enacting their presence, imitating the possession. These hybrid performative contexts are also defined scintillamento, even if possession does not happen. Scintillamento, is a highly polemic term covering various behaviors, including somatic emotional crisis, possessional dance, and even its heritage imitation. That drives me to suggest that scintillamento is eminently defined by performative elements, notably the dance, the music, and the red loincloth. To conclude, I would like to share some photos and audio materials. This photo represents a Kalundu spirit, that is a medium possessed by a Kalundu spirit, effectuating an offering to the sea agents on the island. And this offering was commanded in 2014 by a public society to inaugurate a maritime transport connection. And here, so I was in doubt if showing the video or make you listen the audio, but we can do both. I think we have some more minutes, because there are many ethnomusicologists, and I think they can appreciate only the sound. This song is sung at the offering to the sea, and maybe later we can see the video. And this is
mais tarde, pá. Vem daqui, pá. Amigo, Deus, eu não sou homem, tá bebendo, tu tens que responder, pá. Pode malhar, a vida parece já está, por exemplo, já está. Tu tens que responder. Nada,
Sorry, I had to cut because I would like to show also the video. If the, okay. So. Very quickly. I think I concluded.
Hi, everybody. First, I want to thank and acknowledge the indigenous peoples and nations, including the Mohican, Mashantucket, Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Schaghticoke, Golden Hill, Paugussett, Niantic, and the Quinnipiac, and other Algonquin peoples upon whose territory I'm a guest and upon which this institution exists. First Nations have stewarded through generations these lands and waterways of what is now the state of Connecticut and the rest of Turtle Island. I'd like to thank all of you for being here today, and thanks to the organizers for accepting my proposal and creating this awesome forum. I don't know if I've seen such a congregation focused on these subjects before. Maybe there has been, but I hope more of them happen. Today, I'll speak to the best of my ability about a small community in a corner of Ghana, West Africa, who practice what can broadly be called African traditional religion. These indigenous beliefs and their practice are known as Dikonu Subo or Tro Subo in the Ewe language, which translates literally as traditional service or worship. Such a practice and belief system is also known by a more widespread and polysemous term locally and internationally, that being Vodou. Vodou is a word used by Gbe-speaking people from Ghana to Benin to refer to a venerated spirit entity. It also refers to the physical representation of said spirit entities in the form of sculptures, statues, or other physical objects, usually composed of various natural materials, but not always, and often, but not always, bearing an anthropomorphic quality. Vodou engenders a belief system, a philosophy, a way of understanding reality, and a guide to life. It is through the lens of Vodou, with its mythology, cosmology, histories, that adherents make sense of the world and their place in it. Rather than being a meditative or introspective practice, Vodou is experiential. It uses ritual, sound, song, and dance as a means of communicating, embodying, imploring, and appeasing spiritual entities to work on your behalf. It provides answers for life's mysteries through its narratives or poetics, holistic healing, divination, and communion with the divine through possession. The Vodou worldview can be understood as the interaction of various characters and forces, both seen and unseen, whose roles and influence can be assessed and controlled for the positive benefit of humanity in the current existence. It is inherently life-affirming, practical, and focused around the factors that contribute to the succession and sustainment of life in the here and now. The realm of West African Vodou culture is primarily found among the historically related people in the southern regions of present-day Ghana, Togo, and Benin, and part of southwestern Nigeria. This geocultural zone includes the Ewe and Fon as notable ethno-linguistic forces, as well as several other subgroups, each with varying degrees of cultural diversification from each other. It should be noted that populations from this geocultural zone have had a significant influence on diaspora in African, Atlantic, and Caribbean cultures, especially in Haiti and Brazil, among other locations. Dagomate is a relatively small village of about 600 people, composed of mostly farmers and traders. It is located in the southeastern Ghana's Volta region, home to the country's ethnic Ewe population. The majority of Dagomate's residents are descendants of the 5 brothers of the Agujamaga family, who were responsible for bringing the shrine of a deity named Torgbui Apetorku to the community. Torgbui Apetorku is primarily a Vodou of healing and protection against malicious spiritual activities, which can often manifest as a physical ailment. Generally speaking, Apetorku is understood to assist a devotee in any endeavor, such as success in education or business, or to overcome any obstacle that manifests in the physical world, such as infertility and mental and physical illness, for example. Though it has origins in what is now Benin, the deity was brought to Ghana in the 1940s by one Akpanaka Amonohu Kokuvi. Through him, a shrine was established in Dagomate sometime in the early 1950s at the behest of the founding families of the community. Since its establishment, it has had a profound effect on Dagomate, especially effectively becoming the center of the community, physically, economically, and spiritually. Some of you may marvel at the size of this building, and perhaps it's even a church. This size is unorthodox as shrine buildings go, but that's purely a reflection of the need to accommodate members that gather on days of worship and festivals. It has undergone 2 expansions over the past 70 years. The shrine fulfills numerous roles for the adherents and the community they form. Ritual performances and experiences contribute to one's understanding of Ewe cosmology and the forces that affect one's life and reinforce the power of belief in a deity. Membership creates and strengthens an indigenous cultural identity that is conspicuously, or consciously, I should say, consciously non-Western, non-Christian, or syncretic in nature. It is characterized as the path of the ancestors and helps reaffirm ancestral connections. It provides a support network of other worshipers who share similar experiences, who recognize their shared membership beyond the context of the shrine to connect with other followers of traditional religion in general. Music and dance are inextricably connected to Vodou and feature prominently in rituals and other social practices. As such, the shrine is an open opportunity to connect with, participate in, learn, and sustain traditional music and dance forms. Without music and dance, there can be no shrine worth talking about, as nearly every major ritual act has an accompanying musical act. Essentially, the identity of a Vodou is strongly expressed through its associated music and dance, and there is no significant Vodou that does not have an identifiable and active musical practice. The efficacy of a Vodou ceremony and communication with the supernatural is partly contingent on the appropriateness of the music and dance and the performance practice that accompanies it. Like prayer and rituals, music and dance are intrinsically linked with trance, possession, healing, and general worship in Vodou. It must be stated here that in the ontology of many West African cultures, especially the Ewe, all illnesses have a spiritual root, despite its perceived physical manifestation and cause. The question of why something has occurred is of much more concern than how, and the why is understood in the matrix of cosmology. So to gain a small understanding of how healing is conceived of and the role that songs play within it, it's necessary to understand its relationship to the hierarchy of spirituality that exists in this world. All things relegated to the realm of voodoo exist in the larger cosmology of Bear-speaking people, which includes various actors and energies, including a supreme creator being, mystical beings, the voodoo, who act as intermediaries between the creator and humans, ancestors, supernatural powers, which includes divination, witchcraft, herbal medicine, and other metaphysical forces. These are all seen as drawing from the same cosmic force and are understood to work together in directing one's life and all that can occur within it. All of these entities are reified in various modalities, such as song, drum language, proverbs, folk tales, visual arts, mythology, and dance. These modalities work together, drawing from the same shared cosmology and history to contribute to a holistic and unified understanding of reality. The totality of Ewa cosmology acknowledges the aforementioned modalities and the interrelation and impact they have on all social and spiritual endeavors. This is clearly explained by two esteemed indigenous Ewa scholars. Poet and academic Kofi Awuno speaks broadly when he says, "To speak of the nature or religion in any traditional African society is to attempt to isolate what is the very essence of the society. For the whole society is based on the proper direction of the religious and spiritual obligations of man toward the hierarchical structure in which he takes his own place in all three stages of life." Another indigenous scholar narrows the focus into the realm of healing when he states, "The physical body is the vehicle of the complex soul, and the two are inextricably joined in earthly life, that what affects one is manifested in the other. The purificatory rites heal the complex soul, and the herbal remedies the physical body." There are various rituals for healing a patient at the Apetorku shrine, some of which are performed in a dedicated private area, especially if the sickness is severe. But the most public and regular practice, and the one that employs music more than others, is known as dodada, or sickness healing, in which each patient may undergo once or twice a month. It involves a patient seated in front of a deity known as Hogbanu, who is considered a messenger and catalyst for spiritual action. Similar to Legba, if some of you know who Legba is. Seated there shirtless, the patient is massaged with sanctified palm oil, known as amija, and sanctified herb-infused water, known as amachi. As his body and limbs are moved and massaged, he inhales the smoke and feels the heat from a sacred fire that sits at the base of Hogbanu. Herbal concoctions and poultices may also be administered. Though there are over 400 songs related to the worship of Torgbui Apetorku, during the Dodada ritual, only 5 songs are exclusively sung. These songs support the healing process in 2 ways. First, their messages can work upon the patient psychosomatically, with the meaning of the text and sound of the music amplifying the other healing modalities and reifying the spiritual reality in which the patient exists. Second, the song and their meaning is also directed at the deities themselves, imploring them to work in the healing process for the patient. In the psychosomatic metaphysical complex that is the Konu Subo, or traditional spiritual practice, the reinforcement of the spiritual strength, efficacy, power, and invulnerability of one's chosen deity is essential to a healthy and sustained spiritual practice and relationship with that deity. The power the deity has in protecting, healing, and empowering the supplicant is revealed and reinforced most powerfully through drumming, dance, and song. Seen as a whole, the ritual of Dodada is a multi-sensory experience involving the sound of music and the meaning of the text, the smell and heat of the sacred fire, the feeling of being massaged with sacramental materials, the smell of those sacraments, and the cool feeling of bathing with sanctified water. All of these combine to create a tangible healing effect on the patient. Healing at the shrine is not a quick affair and can take anywhere from weeks to many months. When a patient is finally deemed to be healed, their head is shaved, they're dressed in a new white cloth, the related family members of the patient are invited to the shrine, and the cured patient is presented before the family and the general congregation as a healed person, no longer under the care of the shrine. As part of this, the patient is also made to dance to cement their newfound health and vitality. With all of the above in mind, let's look at 3 songs used in this ritual for a sense of the meaning and messages they convey. In this song, the superiority of Apetorku, characterized as a strong ala, or animal, over any jo, is at the root of this song. Yes, so jo, or joka, is a type of spiritual power that can be used for good or evil purposes. The terms ajewo, paseto, anawe, all refer to proponents of what's known as witchcraft, a spiritual power generally used for negative purposes. The phrase glimdo is interesting and requires more translation. The word glee alludes to being grinded in the context of a battle or conflict, i.e. defeat. Thus glimdo, to be gleamed, if you will, denotes an unsuccessful attempt of the same. Though the translation I have there is clear, I'll include the late shrine elder Huno Sike Davo, his explanation and impact of this song. If you have a juju to kill people, Apetorku is more powerful than your juju. They are singing that song and healing you, pouring water on you. It is more powerful than any juju on earth. All the witches can gather around. They will only fly over me. They won't touch me. And when he's using the word juju, that's in English, anyways, Ghanaian English and Nigerian English as well. Juju is, I don't even know the origin of that term. It's contested, but it's a term used to signify these negative sort of spiritual attacks someone may undergo. In the next song, the singer expresses a double lamentation. He refers to his sickness in asking his mother's age mates to bring life back to him, insinuating that his life is not there, and ask for his mother's age mates to do this for him. The question is, why would he ask his mother's friends instead of his mother directly? Well, that's alluded to in the phrase, Batonya wam hoho, mine already happened, meaning his own misfortune occurred long before, specifically his mother's death. Thus, he has no one to advocate and perform these rituals for him, as his mother could do. The mention of one's poli references the connection and relevance to the indigenous concept of destiny, or se, or jogba se, as understood in the context of one's complete life cycle, and that there is still more for the singer to do with his life. The song further contains a degree of figurative speech and the use of the metaphor of cleaning a dirty cloth to represent healing. Huno Davo explains again. It's part of our healing. The black cloth that is nearly gone to death will go back to white. White means back to life. So when we're healing the person, we sing this song. The leniency from Apetorku will come into the action of healing the sickness. So that for the patient, he's sitting there, he's hearing all these songs, hearing all these words. It will help him also in the healing in combination with the medicine, psychologically. Hearing these songs is working on him spiritually. In the last song, C.K. Davo explains this as being sung from the perspective of a shrine elder, or perhaps even the voice of the deity itself. The song uses the metaphor of ashigbama, or trading as a business, to express the sickness and suffering of one of the children of the shrine is experiencing. He says, ashigbama is the sickness, or a trip for trading, that he, the child or sufferer, is not coming. He's sick and looking for a healing, but couldn't find it. So they, the shrine elders, are healing him and asking, when will she be well again, healed? I'll play a short excerpt now of an excerpt from this ritual to give a sense of its sonic, visual, and tactile character. Aside from bestowing spiritual protection, Torgbui Apetorku has a greater reputation as a shrine that heals and has devoted much of its energy to these efforts. In fact, one of the earliest projects the shrine initiated was free accommodation for patients of the shrine and their caregiver, constructing an actual lodge, if you will, for them. However, shrine leaders recognize that not every affliction can be cured using indigenous methods and that Western science is useful in those cases. This is evident in the completion of a modern health clinic that employs Western medical services and technology in the community, which was paid for by the revenue from the shrine. Conversely, shrine elders readily admit that many of the patients they receive for indigenous healing are those who are unable to find any cure at their local hospital, but found successful treatment at the shrine. This acknowledgement of the mutually beneficial relationship between Western and indigenous medical practices is given by the head priest of the shrine, Ngogbia Kofi Davo. He states, "We know that there are some sicknesses we cannot cure because we do not have the machines to detect. But some diseases, if you put the herbs together and pray spiritually, it will go. That's why this religion, Apetorku, we put up clinics." But beyond the sphere of individual health within its walls, the shrine also acts as a catalyst for improving the standard of living and health of the community overall through various social development schemes and projects that have been instituted over the past 2 decades. These include a health clinic complex with modern equipment and facilities, accommodation for resident doctor and nurses of the clinic, accommodation for patients of the shrine, accommodation for teachers and the headmaster of the local school, electrification of the community, sanitation projects, water infrastructure, a community center, and a guest house for visiting members, among other things. All of this is done via the income generated from the shrine, via ritual activity, and overseen by a council of shrine elders. If we combine the above achievements with the direct healing of the shrine presents and the healthy cultural identity it engenders through ritual and expressive arts, it's easy to see the major contribution to micro and macro level vitality that this institution offers. And to finish, in a society which is still heavily in a post-colonial hangover, adherents of traditional religion in Ghana face blatant stigmatization and discrimination from a society that is heavily Christianized and sadly views traditional spiritual practices as heathen, backward, satanic, and pagan. In fact, one reason for the construction of their own health clinic was due to the discrimination and second-class treatment community members faced at Christian-run hospitals in the neighboring towns. Resilience is an underlying theme in the story of this shrine, and studies in cultural resiliency have identified protective factors that contribute to a culture's health, including indigenous forms of spirituality, language, music and dance, and forms of healing. The shrine of Torgbui Apetorku encompasses and sustains all of these, and it ensures that the vitality and robustness of the community, for the community's overall health and sustainability. The shrine and the community that has formed around it is notable in that they change the narrative about the usefulness and relevance of indigenous spirituality and those who practice it. There's no dichotomy of being a practitioner of Vodou and engaging with modernity, for Vodou does as it always has. It adapts, it tolerates, it guides, comforts, fortifies, and inspires the believer to face the challenges of life head-on as it has for generations before. Spiritual institutions like this one should be recognized as pole stars of indigenous culture, which allow communities and individuals to thrive and navigate the complex world that is post-colonial Africa with a healthy sense of pride and identity. Thank you.
Eric, coming from Trinity College, Hartford, and thank you so much.
Great. Good afternoon, everybody. You all still awake? Yes. All right. I'm so thrilled that I'm not the last one before lunch. All right. So, intersections of faith, place, and space transpired at a Missa Conga, an Afro-Brazilian Catholic drumming mass in Hartford, Connecticut in April 2018. This magnificent event, perhaps for the first time in the United States, brought together the Portuguese and African diasporas, as well as the global influence of the Catholic Church. The multiple convergences that transpired within this moment were revealed to me in the words of Father Antonio Jorge Chingui, originally from Angola, and current priest of the Nossa Senhora da Fátima congregation that serves both the Portuguese and Brazilian communities in the greater Hartford area. He said, "The Congado Mass was, for me, an intense experience. Even though I knew almost nothing about the Congado, I accepted the opportunity and challenge to open myself to something new. That was when something almost inexplicable happened. I felt like I was enveloped within a déjà vu. And I would say that it seemed as if I had encountered an ancient past that I had already lived. All of this left a very strong feeling within me because I am African from Angola, and that is where many cultural nuances of the Congado were born. Africa, mother of the Conga spirits, wanted to dance within me to the sound of the drum. This Afro-Catholic drumming mass that took place in central Connecticut helps to reveal the historical bonds and continued perseverance of this tradition, while simultaneously unveiling forces that are forged within institutional frameworks that have facilitated access for those with social or financial means and transparent barriers for those without. The Congado Mineiro is a musical religious manifestation that has been and continues to be reliant upon a myriad of structures that simultaneously reinforce and strengthen the tradition. Ethnomusicologist Elizabeth Travassos notes that even though the missionization was a key strategy of domination, Christianization did not necessarily result in the submission of African slaves to the religious culture of the European colonizers. Within this perspective, it's important to consider Catholic traditions of the Americas as African or Afro-diasporic, since according to ethnomusicologist Michael Iyanga, Catholicism was already a relatively widespread African religion, primarily in Central Africa, generations before the transatlantic slave trade. Afro-Catholic coronation ceremonies can trace their histories to around the beginning of the 16th century, when the independent Kingdom of Congo converted to Catholicism, like we heard earlier, an event that had an enduring impact upon the neighboring Central African groups who supported or resisted this cultural shift. Yet, this also influenced religious culture of Africans throughout the Americas. While significant attention has been devoted to religious manifestations from West Africa, these examples are frequently framed as a syncretic blending of multiple African religious beliefs within an unquestioned singular notion of Catholicism. Art historian Cécile Fremont notes that simply recognizing this perspective may move us to rethink Catholic saints, human devotees, and the face and sound of religion in the African diaspora. The central objective of drumming masses throughout Brazil is that it's an annual coronation ceremony for an African king, or a rei do Congo, on patron saint days. The king is invested with varying levels of authority, one that historically includes serving as an intermediary between the enslaved community and the plantation owner, the ability to grant one or more temporary days of freedom, and reports of elites being forced to yield in public or having to give up their seats to a king within a church. Although the process of an Afro-descendant symbolically receiving a crown from a priest may have been perceived by dominant members of a society as a symbol of submission, it's important to consider that these ceremonies contained cultural practices that were quite different from those of the European colonizers. Whereas some Afro-Brazilian forms of religious expression, such as candomblé, were openly persecuted and banned by the authorities, ceremonies and festivities that were more closely aligned with the Catholic Church were allowed to take place in public, and as a result, African religious perspectives were visible for all to see. The Religious Brotherhood of Nossa Senhora do Rosário dos Negros was established in Brazil by the Catholic Church in the mid-17th century, one of many throughout the Portuguese colonies to organize enslaved Africans and their descendants. Several contrasting legends and myths tell origin stories of the patron saint's mysterious appearance, with a general theme demonstrating how the saint appeared and belonged to the domain of Afro-Brazilians. Upon first report of the saint's appearance, the white elite members were in awe of the saint's beauty, removed it from a body of water, and placed it on the pedestal in their church and went home. When they returned the next day, the statue disappeared, mysteriously traveling back to its initial location in the water. They unsuccessfully repeated this process 2 more times, and finally, a Congado drumming procession arrived at the shore, singing songs and playing rhythms of devotion, asking for permission to take care of the saint, which was granted. Elizabeth Travassos notes that in all known accounts, the dances embody a special alliance between certain saints and Afro-Brazilians who have the power to bring this sacred or magical relationship to life. When whites appear in the accounts, they are passed over by the saints in favor of the Afro-Brazilians. Some musical instruments used in the Congado Mineiro serve as reminders of the atrocities faced by the practitioners' enslaved ancestors. Oh, come on. Scooping a metal pan in the sediment and swirling the mixture of soil and water from side to side. The gunga shakers, attached around the ankles of the participants, are intended to recall the sounds of leg irons that were shackled upon the bodies of their ancestors. In addition to remembering a dark and distant past, this performative process also helps to give today's practitioners hope for the future. Another symbolic figure that holds an important position within these processions is the black sailor or marujo. The notion of sailors in military uniforms are another area where African and European symbols could be interpreted in different ways. Perhaps it could be extended to represent military strength or the strength of those who've survived the Middle Passage. Congado practitioner Antonio Beato believes that the marujos are extremely important figures because these sailors represent the people in Brazil who were charged with taking special care of the Africans as they arrived on the Brazilian shores, cleaned them up, and prepared them for sale at the market. These symbolic sailors were caretakers of both body and soul. Returning to our conference and drumming mass in April 2018 at Trinity College, the process of producing this event, an event of this magnitude, revealed many visible and hidden barriers, each requiring its own unique navigation. This journey began when I presented an after-school youth music social service project at the 2015 Samba Fest celebration in Hartford. The Meninos Project aspires to teach socialization skills, responsible community citizenship, and prepare local youth to enter the workforce, primarily through exploration of the rhythms of the Congado Mineiro in combination with popular songs from the region. Wanting to learn more about their connection to the Congado tradition, I wrote and received a Latin Grammy Cultural Foundation grant, where I observed Missa Conga drumming masses in Itabira's Catholic churches. I partnered with the city's Congado Association, composed of 11 neighborhood groups and over 300. Of both groups to discuss each of their perspectives of the tradition. I knew that I could bring one member of the Meninos and another member of the association, but then I was suddenly faced with the reality that it might be impossible to bring even a single member from this association to the United States. The leaders were near 70 years of age. Many of them never held a passport since they had not traveled for more than a few hours from their home throughout their lives. As a result, I needed to assemble a team in Itabira to share this vision, and I was joined by Kleber Camargo Rodriguez, Estael Azevedo, Valerio Adelio, Selma Duarte Cruz, and others who personally helped to walk through this process. Financial barriers were also an issue, since the application fee for a tourist visa alone could cost more than half of a month's salary. Nevertheless, the faith, perseverance, and supporting resources prevailed, and soon a group of over 30 musicians was on their way to the United States. The planning process required securing a Catholic priest in Hartford for the Mass, since Trinity had no Catholic members in their clergy. Following multiple phone calls and planning meetings, we received a commitment from a local priest, but less than a week prior to the service, I learned that he was canceling his participation. He expressed reservations that once the drumming would start, it might move from a reverent mass to a festive party. After several phone calls and on the evening prior to the scheduled service, I met with him near midnight at his residence to explain the scope and details of our misa. I brought a copy of the complete proposed song lyrics and a video of our invited practitioners so that he could witness the respect and reverence that was held for this type of drumming mass. While troubleshooting all potential concerns and anticipating a reluctance to incorporate Afro-Brazilian deities within a Catholic Mass, I acknowledge that the lyrics did indeed include passing references to orixás, the Afro-Brazilian deities, but from the perspective of the participants, this was a genuine form of honoring their interpretation of Catholicism. This practice includes singing, playing drums, dance, and providing offerings of collard greens, yams, and fruits that would have been symbolically produced on the plantations where Africans and their descendants were enslaved. With these reassurances and a greater understanding of this manifestation, the priest wanted the rest of the night to think it over. At this moment, I realized that as a white North American college professor, I held a position of privilege with an ability to advocate in favor of culture practitioners who have limited representation to discuss the value and integrity of their own tradition. I also realized that equity and access for the disenfranchised extends to all formal institutions, not just within the framework of educational structures. At 2:30 p.m. on the day of the Mass, just before, I received formal confirmation that we could proceed with our scheduled 6:30 p.m. service. A program was quickly finalized and translated from Portuguese to English, and soon a royal procession took over campus, heading towards the chapel. The sounds of the drums and vibrant colors of royal costumes and banners called out to everyone who heard the rhythms of this majestic court. With curiosity, students opened windows and sat with legs hanging out of the sills, and doors swung open for others to stream outside and see where it was going. When we arrived at the chapel, the priest opened the doors, stood on the steps, and listened to the practitioners sing their request for permission to enter. They sang, "Abre a porta da igreja, ai, ai, que nós queremos entrar, ai, ai. Tô chegando lá de longe, ai, ai, com promessas para pagar, ai, 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 ai." Upon arrival at the altar, I did have this translated, but not here, right? So they sang, "I want to come in," right? Upon arrival at the altar, the mood changed from jubilance towards a more somber, remorseful tone in the singing of a penitential act. This was immediately followed by a jubilant Congado glory, where they sing, "Tá caindo flor, lá no céu, cai na terra, eita, tá caindo flor." And so the flowers are falling from the sky to the earth. The flowers are falling, right? So at this moment, it was later described to me that it's at this moment that the spirit or soul of the old African or Preto Velho descends into the Mass, demonstrating that within the formal structure of a Catholic Mass, elements of African religiosity are embedded in plain view for all to see and experience. So I'm going to briefly describe a bit of the Mass, and then I'll show some video to place it in context. The priest offers a prayer, and the dancers jubilantly, reverently bring the Bible forward to the altar, singing, "Speak, Lord, speak here with me. You have words of life. I believe in you." An acclamation hymn reflects the pain, suffering, and darkness experienced up to the final days of enslavement, followed with the gospel of liberation symbolized by Princess Isabel's signing of Brazil's abolition of slavery in 1888, singing encouragement for Afro-Brazilians to wake up to freedom. The offertory of the people followed the gospel, featuring several goods harvested from plantations, and then later singing the Ashe Saint, and then also in the greeting of peace, invoking the deity Oxalá by singing, "Oxalá I can be, the Lord's peace be with you." A crowning ceremony follows the communion, formally consecrating the new king and queen's reign for the next year. Upon conclusion, all participants exit the church in a recessional accompanied only by a somber drumming rhythm. All participants face the altar and walk backwards in reverence. There we go. And I'll play this and then I'll zip through my last little bit. Okay, I try to. Daylight had faded to darkness during the ceremony, and instead of the somber procession leading to the church, we left the church to jubilant music and acrobatic celebratory dancing by practitioners, perhaps a distant connection to New Orleans brass bands, another Central African descended musical procession. Having completed a week of conference presentations, interactive workshops, and performances, the practitioners returned to Brazil, and the Congado Association members received awards of recognition from the Itabira City Council for their outstanding international representation of the city. This formal acknowledgement was important for the visibility and viability of these practitioners who had recently been denied funding for transportation to an annual pilgrimage for a multi-day encounter in the town of Aparecida do Norte in São Paulo. Just 2 months later, I was invited to present an overview of our work in the Itabira City Hall chambers, followed by a procession throughout the streets of the city with all 11 neighborhood groups from the Congado Association, as well as the Mineiro. I just have to stop for a second. As the procession walked by by an evangelical church, they ran to shut the doors to basically keep the sounds of the drums from invading the space. So at the end of this processional, city and state officials invited me to help distribute new uniforms to all of the city's 300 members. So also the State Secretary of Culture office created 2 expense accounts for both the Meninos and for the association. And then finally, in recognition, I was awarded distinction of honorary citizen of the city of Itabira in September of that year. I thought that was the end of this story. But I recently learned from Marcelo Menezes, a Brazilian Congado practitioner living in Connecticut who witnessed our Missa Conga celebration, that our ceremony helped to make a positive change in his hometown community of Passatempo in Minas Gerais. For years, the mayor of Passatempo did not provide any public funding for Congado processions, as he did not see any benefit in supporting these folkloric manifestations. Marcelo shared video from our Missa Conga, and people questioned why Passatempo was not supporting their own community. If they did, they might also be able to send Congado practitioners to the United States. At this moment, the mayor had a change of heart, which then enabled Valerio Uba, a secretary for this local state representative, to help secure funding of 50,000 reais, around $15,000, to bring Congado groups throughout the region for a multi-day celebration in Passatempo. The process of conceiving, producing, and analyzing the results from a Missa Conga ceremony in the United States has unveiled multiple structural barriers that are both visible and hidden for both practitioners and institutions. I am both thrilled and overwhelmed by the real and tangible positive impacts that have helped to that have emerged from this process of academic inquiry and curiosity. This entire project transformed transformed into positive change that directly impacted the lives of hundreds of people, notably the priest. And he said, "When the procession arrived at the door of the chapel to ask permission to enter, it seemed to me that they weren't bringing a strange manifestation. They came to return something of mine that had been lost to the forest of history. When they were dancing and singing, I, in my silence, dialogued with my own past. Where have the spirits of my heritage walked? They have walked the trampled folds of my cultural essence, which I am encountering today. Why is it only today that I'm encountering the Congado? But, as they say, it's never too late. From here and moving forward, I hope to never miss out on an opportunity to celebrate the richness of this marvelous cultural embrace of history and faith. Thanks to all of those who crossed air and sea to bring the flavor and knowledge of the Congado." Thank you.
Thank you so much, and I will invite you all to actually take a seat at the front for some questions. All right, the floor is open.
Hi, thank you so much. I have a question for Dr. Andrews. I was curious about when viewing the video you showed of the gentleman being cleansed, I was curious about the spatial dimension of that particular rite and wanted to know if you could speak a bit more about space and healing and how these, because it seemed that there were groups of people in, so yeah, if you could just speak to that aspect of the rite, please.
Sure. Oh, wow, proximity. Yeah, I can, to the best of my ability, I'll explain a little bit. One thing to bear in mind with that space, that particular shrine, is that it's massive, right? The actual space that it inhabits and how people are situated, it's not normally, in most contexts, it's a bit much more intimate. So, like I said, due to practicality of accommodating people, they've slowly expanded the physical footprint of that building and the height of it also. And to me and other members of that shrine, sometimes to the detriment of the sonic experience, especially when there's not many singers. Normally there'd be upwards of 100, 200, 300 people at times singing these songs. So the effect much different. But for that kind of ritual, which is only, it happens, it's not a prescribed time like every week or it's just when people are free, available, they'll do that for a particular person. So whoever is available to sing or to play the instruments or the shrine leaders to administer the treatment, you might have a lot of people, you might have a few people. That's almost, in a sense, I know it's not irrelevant, but it doesn't affect the effective quality. As long as those songs are being sung, that's the main thing. But regarding the spacing of it all, yeah, where those drums were located, they're far, far back, because normally that space in between will be filled with people on I'll say, regular days of worship. Likewise, the sides will also be filled with people. So the space where the patient was sitting and where that one Vodou was, the Hogbanu, and behind that area, that's the quote-unquote ritual space. So that's where the deities are normally situated. So that never changes. That's never expanded. That's always been the same footprint. But in between or that and the rest of the building and what happens, that's basically a factor of just the size and the need to expand the building. Proximity to the action, it's not, it doesn't really, from what I can understand, it doesn't inhibit or enhance the efficacy of the ritual, right? The fact that it's happening, that's the main thing, you know what I mean? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just curious, but is there any taboos around contagion and pollution and those things? When it comes to...
There's a lot of taboos, or what they call echo, but related to contagion only, I won't speak to that particular shrine, but in other rituals, yes and no. That has to do with your, what you're doing the day before or night before. You would engage in certain rituals, but like that's specific to different things. To generally speak, there's nothing that I've ever experienced or was told about contagion as such in that context of practice or ritual, no. The main thing is remove your shoes. That's the biggest, yeah. Some shrines, you remove shirt, anything Western, watches, hats, shoes. But this shrine, it's mostly the shoes that they want you to remove and a hat if you come in out of respect, among other things, yeah. Do I choose, or who chooses? Yeah, you choose. Oh, I'll choose with the mask there. Yeah, white mask. Yep, that's you. That's you. Yeah, you with the mask on. You can go ahead. Yeah.
Thank you for this presentations. I appreciate it. I'm curious about the textual sonority of the polytonality between the voices and the instruments. I'm wondering how might these frequencies of the dissonances promote healing? I'm not sure if that was covered, but please, if it was.
Is it to me?
It might be to you, to whomever.
You can, I'll talk to it, but you can.
Sure.
If you want to go ahead, you can.
I didn't understand the question because I wasn't sure that it was for me. Can you?
Okay, so whoever wants to answer, I will just repeat the question. I'm curious about the textual sonority of the polytonality between the voices and the instruments. How might the frequencies of these dissonances promote healing?
in my case, I'm not sure to be able to answer because really I'm not an ethnomusicologist. And really my focus was very relational, so I can tell you much more about who sings and why than how he managed to sing. But I'm not sure that it would be an interesting answer for you. But really, I have to confess, I'm not fully competent to give a musical answer.
I would just say, in my example, in this particular case, just thinking about the instruments that that carry memory were all shakers, so they were in that kind of auditory bandwidth of the real highs of conveying that kind of sound. So maybe there's something in there. I haven't explored that myself, but just thinking about how the drums have a really low, range basically, and so there is a contrast between that, but it's hard to reduce it to just the auditory experience because it's the process of performing it that brings healing, I think, to the practitioners. And the absence of at least as it was explained to me, the absence of not being able to do that is just as painful to the practitioners, saying this is what we need to do, and we need financial resources to make these pilgrimages to go places. So at least as it was expressed to me, it was really the process of doing it that was the most important to them from their perspective.
I'll answer your question head on. The sound and the timbre and the melodic material, the rhythms, the instruments have no direct bearing on healing. These are the exact same musical materials that are used in social musics, in all the music of that particular area. It's the context. And if you do studies into music and trance and many places, musical materials, perceived dissonances or harmonies, whatever you want to call it, it's always the context, it's the process, it's the action that gives the meaning to that music. Music, this is very controversial. I'll say this though, this is not focused on this music, but all music. Music itself, there's no inherent meaning in it. Some people may not agree with that, but it's what we bring to it. We bring meaning to sound, right? There may be some aspect of sound we can't discuss or describe that affects our brains before we can even speak, maybe, or people, and that's powerful, yes, but to say this always means this, absolutely, in a musical sense, I disagree. And if you can give me proof otherwise, I'd love to see it and hear it, but as me, myself, yeah, that's why in that context, there's no specific melody that brings healing in this context. There's no specific rhythm that brings the healing. There's combinations of these things, but it's the same melodies, same melodic material, same rhythmic material, timbral material, instruments that are used in non-spiritual contexts as well. So that's the best I can answer that.
Thank you. I just want to clarify. I was talking about the dissonance between the instrument and the voices, not necessarily the melody or harmonic.
Oh, but I don't see any different. I don't hear any dissonance between. That's a qualitative term as well. Dissonance or not.
Of course, and I'm just wondering. I'm sorry. Of course, and I'm just wondering, how would you respond to music therapists or something like that? So I'm just wondering.
Yeah. That again, that's all very dependent on the person undergoing a treatment and what they would perceive as being pleasant or dissonant or not. So, for me to. Everything I just heard there was very pleasant and not dissonant. So
I would just add that the cultural context is so important to each, because it's like when we look at what the definition of something is, whether it's a definition of music, if there is a term used that defines music, but then also like we could look at indigenous perspectives, like there's some indigenous South American cultures that believe that the sound of a maraca can actually be, can speak directly to the soul. So a shaman will get in the way of the sound of the maraca to serve as an intermediary so that you are not affected negatively. So really, cultural context really matters, I think, in each of these situations.
Yes, just being mindful of time, we will take one more question and then move to break. I see,
Choose
yes.
the questioner.
I wonder if you can recall Samson Okum, the first Native American who was trained under a Yale graduate in 1700 and was sent to Europe to raise money to train Native American students in Connecticut. And that money he raised in Europe was converted to structure Dartmouth
Where your school is, Dartmouth, is that what you mean?
in New Hampshire.
Oh, New Hampshire, oh, okay. I never knew that, no?
Yeah, it was supposed to go towards
was-
training
the
an
money he raised in
indigenous
Europe
school here, yeah,
Was to train Native American kids
yes.
in Connecticut and over the country. But it was his sponsor from here, a graduate of Yale, Divinity, changed that over to train white kids, and now transported from Connecticut to Dartmouth College in New Hampshire.
Thank you for that commentary. I think we're gonna, okay, one more. Nadelka?
You don't mind?
Please.
Dr. Andrews, thank you,
Yes.
everyone. I'm very much fascinated in the idea of community centers and, which.
Oh, the-
Oh, sorry. I'm very much interested in community centers everywhere, but definitely in Black and brown communities. And so I'm wondering about your takeaways. I'm fascinated by the fact that they have a community center with a health aspect in it that uses more indigenous traditions. And so what are your takeaways that can be applicable for Black and brown communities? You know, with that disconnect of, first of all, I love post-colonial hangover. First of all, I love that. But those of us dealing with it, what are the takeaways from how that health center, community center is being used there, how we can use it here?
That's a huge subject, awesome question to think about. Again, I try to, in all I do, try to focus on what I know and what I've experienced. So to try and extrapolate it to a different context, I may not have the correct answer. But the reason I can say this much about this particular community, and I've seen many different communities in this region which do not have the same sort of feeling of unity or progressiveness that exists there. A lot of it comes down to the unity of the community. So the reason why this particular shrine works and thrives is because everyone in that community is a member of it. Actually, unconstitutionally in Ghana, they don't allow any church to be built in the land that they control. Yeah. Some will not agree, but I think that is why this place is thriving, because as soon as you introduce a differing ontology and all the colonial baggage and oppression that comes with it, you're going to have division straight away, right? And that's what you see happening in a lot, not only Ghana, I'm going to say the whole sub-Saharan. This is what's happening. This is what's driving a lot of division. Is this, and it's been that way since the introduction of a different mindset, a different worldview. So the reason why they thrive is that they recognize this, and they recognize that the chief has said this to me numerous times. He said, "We will not. I'll never, as long as I'm alive, I'll never allow a church to be built there, because he knows as soon as it starts, the whole thing will collapse, and there'll be some divisions and dichotomies. So you have to start with that premise of a unified sense and control of land and resources to enable that to flourish, right? And that's very tricky, very rare. That, like I said, in Ghana, that's a rarity to see that. I know other communities that I visit a lot, and it's the opposite almost. The traditional practitioners, they're always struggling just to even live almost on what's the word? Unperturbed by their neighbors. They're even their own brothers, right? It's fascinating. I have one friend, I'll finish with this. I have one friend, his house is here, and right next to it is his brother, cousin brother. It's probably 50 feet away. The cousin brother is a staunch traditionalist, born and raised in the shrine. His father was the head priest. He's now the head priest. His children, grandchildren, everyone is in that. His cousin brother, same grandfather, he's a staunch, evangelical type of Christian, and every Sunday he has a loudspeaker. He sets up in his little compound, and he starts denigrating traditional believers, saying they're all going to hell. And he's directing it at his brother, really, but anyone else who. So that's the extreme opposite end of how things are, you know. I won't get into more of it because I'll be here for a while. But yeah, but like places like this give me hope that, you know, people can awaken, and you know, and I find that over the 20 years I've been visiting, I'm seeing more younger people now joining shrines like this, because they've realized, you know, what their parents told them about going to church, and they realize, well, that doesn't speak to me really as the person who I am, and when I think about what it is to be a Ghanaian or an African, you know, it's in the shrines. That's where really it speaks, right? So we'll see how the future is. We can't know.
Thank you. If we could give a round of applause to the speakers.